Blessings, beloveds. Welcome back to my channel, Anastasia, Cosmic Astrologer, with you guys today. Okay, so I'm just wanting to do a short video, and it will be short. I want to just give a few ideas and thoughts around aspect patterns. I've had a few questions from people, and I can completely understand and empathize with you all. There's not a lot of material out there written about aspect patterns in terms of how to truly understand them in your birth chart. So what I want to highlight today is this. First of all, in order to accept what I'm saying and consider it in your own chart, you need to be open to the possibility of past lives and future lives, for that matter. So when we are looking at the birth chart, there are a lot of people that have various aspect patterns. Now, the chart itself has, multiple layers of aspects, many different aspects going on with the 10 to 12 different bodies in the chart that we use. So, there are various types of aspects, which I'm not going to go into today because the focus is aspect patterns. So this is what I would like to offer as an understanding. The main aspect patterns that I'm referring to, by the way, are the Yod, which is basically two planets sextiling each other and a third planet forming a quincunx to those two planets sextiling each other, which looks like a Y, like the letter Y. So it's three planets, but you can have more planets on those points as well. The Yod, as we know, and I've done a couple of videos on the Yod aspect on two famous people's charts, and I'll do some more because there's many, many more people out there with Yod aspects in terms of famous people, and they're always great examples to use. As I frequently say, the best way to really learn how these planetary energies are manifesting and expressing in different people's lives is to study a person's life. Because again, that the birth chart is multi-layered, multi-dimensional, as you are, as I am, as we all are. And the configurations in a person's chart will manifest differently depending on the path of evolution that the soul is on, depending on whether a person is living on the consensus stream of existence, or whether they are on the individuated path, or whether they are on a spiritualized path, and then there are sub-periods in between. That concept comes from evolutionary astrology, which is Jeffrey Wolf Green's model. So I use that a lot in trying to understand a person's birth chart and where they are on that stream from an evolutionary perspective. Now, aspect patterns are a similar thing in that they pertain to the many different lives that we have all lived. So the Yod, which I've explained what configures a Yod, the T-square is another one that's very dynamic, as is the Yod. The Yod is a very fated aspect pattern, and some people have a couple of Yods or sometimes even more, and that can get very, very tricky to delineate and to understand what it actually means. The T-square is also a very challenging configuration. It's two planets opposite each other and a third planet, which looks like a T. That's why it's called a T-square. The third planet is the planet that destabilizes or can bring resolution and stability to that configuration. And with the T-square, it is very, very common to experience those energies in relationships. So the T-square produces a lot of tension. It's very dynamic, as are all challenging aspects, really. They're challenging. They're not evil. They're not inherently evil, but they are very, very, very challenging. And they do require us to evolve and to develop our character and our awareness, right? So T-squares, yods, and another one called a grand square, which is quite a big configuration. It usually involves 4 planets, and it's 2 oppositions squaring each other, right? So the grand square is clearly going to connect to the quality of the signs representing the square. You know, so for example, um, Leo is square Scorpio, Scorpio is square Aquarius, and so forth. You can have what's called a dissociate square, which means that you might have, out of the 4 planets, one of those planets might not be in the quality that would be defined as squaring the other planets, but that can still have a story to tell as well. So there are quite a few different aspect patterns, but the main ones are the yod, the T-square, and the grand square. In terms of the what I would consider the more challenging aspect patterns. And somebody can have all these configurations going on, yods, T-squares, and grand squares in their chart. And it can get a little bit overwhelming to try and understand and interpret what these aspect patterns mean. But what I want to say is this. I just want to quote a particular line out of one of my books. Aspect patterns weave powerful and purposeful energy patterns connecting the many parts of the chart that describe the various several challenges that will come up as a result of the aspect pattern. These difficult layers of aspect patterns show that we have not evolved through these tensions that are denoted by these aspect patterns. Hence, lifetime after lifetime, we come back with these same patterns, at least in some kind of way, because what happens is they just pile up. As these aspects pile up, they configure into these aspect patterns. So when somebody has a lot of different challenging aspect patterns in their chart, the implication is that there's been a lot of resistance towards developing and evolving in those areas that the aspect patterns describe, and obviously the archetypal energy of the planet and the sign. Therefore, it just gets built up and built up and built up, and the person is born and has multiple layers of aspect patterns. It's an incredibly dynamic energy to have aspect patterns and difficult aspects like squares, oppositions, conjunctions as well. And the inconjunct, the quincunx aspect. But the positive thing about these dynamic, and they are dynamic aspects, challenging aspects, is that there is tremendous potential for development, for you to work through these energies, because it is the friction, the resistance, the uncomfortableness that these energies produce that cause us to either further resist or to actually create more awareness and resolution and evolution, right? So the need is to resolve the underlying tensions and lessons in order to evolve. These aspect patterns have tremendous potential for our growth development in our character. So when you are looking at your own chart or somebody else's chart, if you're working with astrology or learning about astrology, as I said at the beginning, it can be very, very overwhelming to understand the various aspect patterns, especially if you've got a couple of yods, a couple of T-squares. First and foremost, you need to understand the nature of the aspect pattern and what it really describes. What does the yod describe? What does the T-square describe? What does a grand square describe? A grand square is really quite a doozy, actually. It's pretty tough to work through, and often a person who has a grand square configuration in their chart really feels it depends if the grand square is let me think about that. Depending on the nature of the the signs as well. That's going to give you a lot of information. I've just lost train of my thought there. So the grand square can feel like a person has a really heavy cross to bear, just to use that language to try and describe. It's a feeling, a lifetime of feeling that there's some really, really deep, entrenched, intense patterns to work through. And obviously the planets are going to, create the storyline around that. So what are the planets involved in the grand square? But a grand square is not easy, is what I'm really trying to say. It could take lifetimes to resolve that grand square, and the same goes with the yods and the T-squares. The yods and the T-squares frequently experienced in the world of relationships. As I said, the T-square, particularly because it's two planets opposing each other and a third planet squaring those two planets. So when you see an opposition of any two planets, oppositions are often polarized energies. So the individual will take on one particular archetype. Say they had a Venus opposite Pluto, for example. Obviously, that's going to play out in relationships because Venus is connected to the world of relationships. But because that energy is polarized, sometimes the person can be the Venus, sometimes they can be the Pluto. Often they project the Pluto onto the other person. So the polarization is what can essentially lead to awareness, because oppositions ultimately create crystallization and awareness. But the initial experience with oppositions is to project them. And the T-square is an opposition with a third planet squaring. So the third planet holds the key to that opposition, in other words, but it almost always initially emerges with great tension and conflict to resolve through those planetary energies. So, as I said, first and foremost, you need to understand the nature of the aspect, the configuration of planets that you're looking at. What is that aspect pattern? How is it defined? What does it mean? Then you need to take into account, all the houses, the signs, etc. What are they highlighting and showing? And, if you've got a couple of yods going, which a lot of people do, then to me, that says that there's been many lifetimes where these aspect patterns and what they define and describe for the individual, they haven't been resolved. So that as I said earlier, that it's just energy patterns piling on life after life after life. So it does get much more difficult to resolve, to work through it, but it's not impossible. Nothing is impossible. But it just depends, what level of evolution an individual is at, how much awareness do they have, how willing is somebody, how able, how willing, how conscious are they about wanting to step into these planetary patterns and what they describe in terms of the inherent tensions, conflicts, and so forth. Now, a lot of these aspect patterns will essentially lie dormant, as it were, which is another reason why it can be very difficult to understand them on an everyday basis, because these patterns are not active and operating every single day of our life. So what usually happens is when an aspect pattern comes to life, as it were, is triggered, in other words, that happens when you have certain transits, progressions, and or another technique which is called primary directions. So your chart gets triggered. These planetary aspect patterns will be triggered at certain points in your life, in certain junctures. So it is those times when a planet, and it doesn't have to be all three or all four, it'll just be one planet that's triggered from that configuration, and there is an opportunity, a very powerful opportunity, to actually experience and understand quite consciously what is actually being asked of you to understand about this aspect pattern. And It comes through a lot in relationships, so partners that we attract in our life, relationships, marriages, can be very prominent in triggering these aspect patterns. With a grand square, it's a little bit different, because the grand square really manifests on the external environment in the person's life. So they experience this sense of internal conflict and tension pertaining to the 4 planets in the grand square, and what those planets represent and symbolize, and what houses they are in. But it is almost always an external experience of tension and conflict that can go on, and great difficulty in resolving those tensions, but certainly not impossible, but incredibly challenging to do so. So there you have it. I just wanted to share with you guys, this is one way of helping you understand these aspect patterns. You need to be open to past lives, future lives. You need to understand the aspect pattern itself. And if you have several aspect patterns that are difficult, challenging, then it is important for you to understand that there's been a series of lifetimes where the soul, that is you, has resisted evolving and developing those particular experiences. So they've just piled up, and they are extremely intensified in a particular life. So if you had a chart now that has multiple layers of aspect patterns, then that's one way of understanding what's going on. So you've got a lot of work to do. Sorry, but you do. That's the truth. All right, guys, I'll see you guys very, very soon with another video. Sending you all much love and blessings, and happy new moon, which is coming up in a couple of days' time. And feel free to email me and ask any questions, or drop any questions below this video. I'll do my best to respond and answer as best as I can. If you want to book a reading with me, I do various types of readings. If you go to my professional Facebook page, there's a link on my website for that. You can see that the different sessions that I offer regarding what types of readings. If you're not on Facebook and you can't access that, then you can just email me directly. Okay, see you guys soon. Much love. Bye.